Hi, and welcome to a special episode of the Thoughtful Talent Show. I'm Jen Werner from Jen Werner Coaching.
And I'm Chad Ahern from Talent Teams Consulting. And today, as Jen just alluded to, we are not here to talk about a Clifton Strengths theme. We're actually here to talk about the most recent Gallup at Work Summit, recorded in 2023. So we came back just a couple weeks ago. We're going to talk about a little the highlights from each of our keynotes that we listened to, the breakout sessions we each attended. And because we can't fit in everything that we covered in 2.5 days, 2 days, we're going to touch on just some of the highlights for each of us. So if you have any further interest in anything we bring up in this session, in this podcast, please get in touch with us, because we would love to be able to share what we learned with any of you that might be listening, so that you can support your teams, your leaders, the people that you lead, in any way possible. So with that, I'm going to toss it back to Jen to start us off by talking about, what did you love about your summit experience this year?
Yeah, well, as you know, I struggled setting appropriate expectations for this event. It's so hard not to compare this year and the Gallup at Work Summit to the other Strengths Summits and Gallup at Work Summits I've attended in the past. I knew for sure, though, that I was going to be excited and energized by knowing that I was going to get to meet new people, and I was going to have a good time alongside others that I know and have just met, and then knowing that I'd be with like a group of people who just get it. Right? Like they get what we do. They know why it's important. They live and breathe their strengths every day. And I think that's the one thing that I knew for sure going in, I was going to get. I was most worried about time and content. So it was shorter than the other live experience I've experienced in the past, 2017 through 2019. Those 3 summits were at least a full day longer. And then also the content, I was really worried that it was going to be very business focused, not on us coaches and helping us, reach the world, but that it was going to be really more towards like trying to get more businesses from businesses. But while I came away from the summit with, happy about my experience, I do find that those 2 concerns are still like top of mind for me. Definitely things that I would like to see different in future years. What about you?
So it's interesting to bring those up, because this was actually my first Gallup at Work Summit experience. And so I was live,
not virtual.
Right. So I had done the virtual one in 2020 when Gallup, along with the rest of the world, had to adjust due to COVID. And I respect that. I found my learner and some of my other themes weren't as sort of energized by the virtual experience. So I kind of put a pin in going to future summits until I could really do it live. And thankfully this year, resources and timing and family commitments and all of that all lined up to make it possible for me to go. So I had some concerns, being analytical and deliberative, and like, what are the risks? You can go listen to our deliberative episode about, why that's how that comes out. I did have some of the same concerns of, is this going to be too sort of focused on Gallup's direct clients or the large organizations that they work with? Is the material going to be applicable to me as a coach? And what I found, what I really liked about my experience was that when I got there, particularly the opening reception, walking to the opening reception was super energizing. About 800 or some portion of that, significant portion of that, all in essentially one room, right at the Gallup office in their main lobby. All of us talking talents and themes and strengths, and even having, and the beauty of that was I was able to meet a lot of coaches that I've only met online, you included. It was really awesome to walk into a room, be like, oh, there's Jen, and you've
a real person,
right? A real, she's not just a face on a screen. I know we did our special little snippet episode from right at the summit, so some of you might have already seen that. But just be able to sit, in the same room with Jen and with other coaches that I've talked to was just awesome. Be able to talk themes, having people both highlight and also poke fun of your themes in the middle of a conversation was just so energizing. So I really appreciated that experience. And then a couple of other highlights, and we'll get to this, the details around some of these in a minute. But watching an interview with Arianna Huffington, it's just, she's such a big name and has great research on sleep and how to be productive, which jives with what Gallup's trying to do. So watching her, the interview with Jim Harter, who is Gallup's chief data scientist, my analytical was like, ooh, this
Loving
is awesome.
that.
Yeah. And then I also got to see a favorite presenter of mine, Dean Jones, who did a wonderful session on manager development that I'll also talk about in a second. What surprised me, though, since I think you also touched on kind of what surprised you, was the lack of interaction within the breakout sessions. It was more of like kind of come in, sit down, it's a classroom, they're going to teach us something, and then we kind of walk out of the classroom. And I find my learner, gets a little bit more jazzed up when I can turn to the person next to me and, talk about the material or have an exercise to do. So there wasn't quite as much of that as I had hoped, or maybe it had been led to believe by some of the other past participants.
Sure.
And then I was also sort of surprised with the sheer sort of production quality. I come out of higher ed. We go to conferences. We're lucky if we've got a stage, a podium, and maybe one main screen. And this was almost full-on theater performance. I mean, there were pump-up videos and massive screens in the conference room. There were 6 people running light boards and soundboards behind me, in the main conference room, the keynote room. So just the sheer production was a little like awing.
Wow.
Kind of, whoa, this is we're serious real now, right?
Yes.
And I guess it's just the difference between for profit and higher ed.
Absolutely.
So it was just a little bit of a surprise, a little bit of a get used to. Now I will say our money was well spent. We were well fed, and the presentations were excellent on the whole. So it was energizing, but just very wowing and a little intimidating at first. So
good. So good. I feel like it's like a beginning of a basketball game or something, and then they're bringing out all the team, everybody's all pumped up and the music is loud and they're like, holy cow, like this is happening. It's awesome. So
I was going to ask you about the first keynote.
Do you want to talk about the keynotes? So remind me Jeremy's last name. I always get it wrong.
I believe you pronounce it Pietrocini.
Okay.
He may crucify me later for that, but we're gonna go with it. He's a great guy.
Yeah, and he's been kind of like the MC or whatever for quite a few years. And I do remember seeing him at one of my last live ones too. And I know you're gonna touch on this, so I just want to bring it back to you in a second. But one of the things that he said that really caught me, and of course it's because it speaks to my I want to encourage people to be who they are instead of trying to be someone who they aren't, or who they think they should be, right? So he said at one point, just let yourself be you. And I'm like, oh, I love that. And it so spoke to me. And that's what I love about some of the stuff that we've shared already, is how we hear the same thing, but it hits us differently because of our themes and what we're doing in life. So what was your big takeaway from Jeremy?
So before I get to my takeaway, I will just say that it does not surprise me that you took away that phrase, because of your tagline, be uniquely you. And there's Jeremy saying just slightly different words.
Just slightly different.
So,
I know I was waiting for him to say my words, and I probably would have whooped, big, loud obnoxiousness right there in the middle of everyone.
That's awesome. The takeaway I took from Jeremy's, before he brought out the next main sort of keynote, he did a wonderful job introducing the summit and starting us off. But the big point he hit on was this idea around development. I think a lot of people hear that word and think, oh, it's, adding on to, it's, continuing to expand yourself. And really, he went through this whole exercise of parsing apart the word. It's developing. You are pulling out what is best about somebody. It's not about adding on. It's about pulling out. It's extracting. He went and used the analogy of Michelangelo. Said, when he looks at a block of stone, the statue is already there. I just need to chisel away what's not needed to reveal the statue that's already in existence. And those two visuals, I think, were really potent and powerful at the very beginning of a strengths focused summit, where we were talking about developing leaders and managers and individual, contributors on teams. So that was the thing that really struck me. That then also led into, he brought on stage John Clifton, who is the CEO of Gallup, and his whole focus, kind of played off of Jeremy a little bit, but he really talked about what I really found awing about his comments were about this second global warming that nobody is talking about. And it's this rise in despair, depression, burnout, pain, anger. Employee engagement is, not going in the right direction. It's and nobody's really talking about it. I mean, they've just released a fantastic book called Culture Shock, which I think, I'm about a third of the way through it already, and it lays out all the data about why we need to pay attention to this. What he was talking about, but the wording of the second global warming. We're talking about worrying about our planet. Yes, that's important. I not just diminishing that at all.
Right.
But then let's think about the humans that are living on the planet and how are they being supported? How are they, going to be happy in life? How can we improve well-being for everybody? I just think it was also super important. So I don't know if you got anything more out of John's comments, but I wanted to start us there.
Yeah, I did. And what caught me was the statistic, and I think it was a global statistic, that only 23% of workers are thriving. So that means like most of us at work are in misery. And then he talked about like how misery spreads. And I think that's when he went into the second global warming, because we talked about that. Like if you're not happy at work and you're working, 88,000 hours or something in your lifetime, the potential of 88,000, hours in your lifetime, and then turn around and like you're miserable most of those hours, like that just bleeds into every other part of your life.
Yeah.
The other one I thought was really interesting is that he had said that in the past, we always judged a country on how they were doing based on their GDP. Like if the GDP was good, that meant life was good, and that is not what their research shows at all now. And I was like, ooh, that's a big one. The high GDP does not equal a better life quality. So I'm like, oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, that one definitely hit me too. Because I know too many people who are just miserable at work. Everything's harder than it should be.
Yeah, they might be paying, pulling a pretty decent paycheck, but they're just they're bringing all that misery and depression home with them after a long day at work. Or even a long series of Zoom calls, and then all of a sudden you turn around and have to interact with your kids or your significant other. That's a recipe for not well. I particularly liked talking about GDP. He talked about building a prison in the middle of a city increases GDP. It doesn't exactly show an indication of
neighborhood better.
Right, it doesn't make the neighborhood better. It doesn't necessarily make the city better, and you just created a sort of a glut in your city center or even on the edge of the city for a lot of other things.
So, I forgot that little note, but absolutely. That was interesting. Okay, so our next one, I think I was going to talk about was Arianna Huffington. Is that where you were going next?
Yeah, so I figured we'd cover all the keynotes first, and then we can talk about the sort of individual breakouts, because I know we were both in the room for all the keynotes. So I'm interested to hear what you got out of it, and then I want to share what I think our listeners might find valuable out of it.
Well, I know you're going to share the quote that she shared, so I'm not going to, but I am going to start with this this like idea about achievers, because she talked about achievers, that even those who are highly engaged and satisfied in their work can still experience burnout. And I was like, oh, that's true, because we just never stop, right? And then this, like, she said it as she's talking about her own talents and how achiever shows up for her and how it led her to burnout. She said, achievers need to be comfortable with incompletion. And I wrote it, I started, I underlined it. I'm like, absolutely, because there is that like little like dissatisfaction that comes at the end of every day, no matter how much we got done. There's something there that we're like, oh, we could have done more. And it is so interesting to hear it from another achiever say, like, yeah, we need to just know there's always more to be done, and just push that off to the side. Otherwise, we're just going to just keep going and going. Do you want to share the quote that we both love?
So first of all, I'll say that listening to her almost felt like a little mini version of our podcast. It was like a thoughtful talent show, because she went through each of her themes and how it plays out in her life, which was fantastic.
So good.
I thought the achiever points are very good ones to consider. The one that I found most interesting is she has connectedness as number one. So she's looking at everything in her life, all the people that she knows, all the ideas that she has being connected in some way, shape, or form. And the quote that you've alluded to that she shared with the audience, which I found a very poignant counterpoint to my deliberative themes that was coming out of her connectedness, is this quote from the Indian poet Rumi, who says this: "Live your life like everything is rigged in your favor." Yeah, and for both Jen and I to have deliberative and sit there, and we're always about the risk and what's going to go wrong or what potentially could go wrong. Here is the opposite of that. Think about that everything is going to work out, and don't worry yourself too much, because if it doesn't happen now, it'll happen later. Or if it doesn't happen, it wasn't meant to happen.
Well, and the evidence is there, Chad. Like, if you look back at our lives, like, look at all the craziness that happened, but that like led to where we are today. Like, if we could just keep our minds set on that quote, we're going to put it on a big plaque or something in both of our offices, so that our deliberatives don't hold us back from some of that, because it's all rigged in our favor.
Right. So I offer that for all my fellow deliberatives out there that might be thinking about, what could go wrong in life, and that there is the other side of the coin that we need to look at every once in a while. So I'm gonna move us from Arianna to the other keynote. I got all jazzed up about, because he was speaking my language, my analytical. So Jim Harter, who's also written a number of books for Gallup, he's their chief data scientist, fantastic guy. He shared all sorts of stats and data, and I won't get into all of it, but I would share two really key points from his presentation. One is they introduced the idea of the Gallup path, which you can go and look at that up later. We might put a link to that in the show notes. But it's a way to connect, what is really critical for you to work on day to day, which is really to develop key managers, but also the top, where you end up having an impact as an organization. Oftentimes Gallup puts stock increase as sort of the end goal, in terms of a for-profit company, or especially a publicly traded one. What's really interesting for me is he also said it's okay to substitute that with mission completion or mission achievement for, say, a nonprofit or a social enterprise that really has a public good focus. So I thought that was really key. The other one, and we're going to talk a little bit about it as we talk about some of the breakouts that you and I both attended, was the pure and utter centrality of the weekly meaningful conversation that each manager should be having with each employee on their team every week. And it just, the integration of strengths into that, it really shortens the distance of conversation between the manager and the employee, because then you have a language to talk about recognition and collaboration and how to best support people, and talk about their strengths, applying their strengths to their goals. That all happens in that conversation. And it doesn't necessarily have to be super short, though it can be. It should be weekly, but he also gave some grace around that. And I think you're going to talk a little bit about that when we get to one of the breakouts. But just the number of times he came back to that idea was just inundating. It's so important. And so we'll talk a little bit about that as we get into our breakouts. But I know you wanted to talk a little bit about the fourth keynote that we both attended, from our friend, our new friend, or at least your new friend, Meisha-Ann.
Yes, Meisha-Ann Martin from Workhuman. And what I loved about her was her energy, for one, like, and for her to get up on stage in front of a room full of, like 1,000 some people. I don't know exactly how many people were there. We should probably get that stat. But she talked about her gender, her generation, her ethnicity, and her strengths. And I think what was like the big takeaway for me on that one is like you just literally just said, using strengths is like a platform or a language to help us like close that communication gap when we understand each other. Going to the summit, everyone we talk to is like, what's your top 5? Like, and then they're all like, rattle them off, blah, 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 blah. This is what I am. And it gives us a place where we can start the conversation. Yeah. And what her point was, is taking into account all of these things about us, because just like we talk about in all of our episodes, achiever looks different for me than it does for someone else. Deliberative looks different in me than it does in you. Even though there's some things that are the same, it's a way we can understand one another, but we could do the same thing based on our generations or whatever, all those other things, but really being able to see the whole person. And then that tied it right back to that like ever flowing line through this entire summit, is that that one-on-one meaningful conversation with your manager, or with managers with their employees, that was the big aha, like in that moment that I had.
I loved her one quick phrase, not to take anything away from what you just shared, but the one key phrase that I took from hers was, all the things you just talked about, age, gender, generation, our backgrounds, our strengths, are all data points of our story.
Yes, right.
And it's that, it's just, you get indicators, but then actually talk to the person, see how they all string together. So anyway, I wasn't planning on talking about that keynote, because I know you got a lot out of that one more than I did, but I love that key phrase, and I thought it was important to highlight.
And that's probably because I met her the very first night and we shared a moment on the fountain together. So like, I already felt like I had a best friend for the day, nice. Or for the summit. So nice. Yeah, it was awesome to meet her. Yeah. So we want to talk about the keynotes now.
You mean the breakouts? We just did the keynotes.
Sorry, yes. I'm sorry, yes, the breakouts. Yes, the breakouts. Yeah. Okay, so we both attended one together. Like, this was the only one that we happened to pick that was the same. Yeah. And it was about burnout prevention. Yes. So one of the things that I think you're going to share, that I want you to share first, actually, before I go into mine, because I think mine is a good follow-up to your thoughts. Yeah. So this breakout session, they were about an hour long, and done by the very capable Jacqueline Robinson, who works at Gallup. I forget her exact job title. But one of the ideas that really struck me actually came toward the tail end of the presentation. It was actually an audience inspired discussion. Somebody asked the question, how do you differentiate between depression and burnout? And I think right now, especially as people are talking about mental health and what what as a manager you can support, what you might need to turn around and talk to an actual licensed professional about, I think differentiating that is really important. And so one of the other audience members said there are two key questions you can ask to differentiate between depression and burnout. And they are versions of each other. So one is, are you tired? End of sentence. Or are you tired of it? If you have an employee that you're working with and they just say they are tired, then they probably have depression, because they're tired of everything. They're tired of home life. They're tired of engaging in their community. They're tired of their work. They're tired of their manager. There is a tiredness that is seeping into all parts of their life. Now, if you get a response to, oh, I'm just tired of it. Yeah. What's the it?
Right. So that person is ideally finding some sort of satisfaction in either their home life, their, relationships, their community, with their kids, if they've got them, but they're probably finding some burnout maybe at work. And that's where you were saying, you need to find out what the it is. If they're tired of home life and they're finding work as a refuge, that's a different conversation. But at least at least then you're dissecting, oh, it's burnout at home, work is refreshing them, or the opposite. If they're tired of the work, but they're still finding happiness at home, then they're just burned out at work. And you can actually probably do something as a manager about that. Right. The depression part, if they're just tired, that's when a manager says, you know what?
Let me get you out of my depth.
Let me find you some resources, and I want to help support you, but I'm not the one to do it.
Yeah.
And I think that was just really key.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I liked is they talked about like the ways to bring up some of these discussions, like, geez, you're looking really tired. Like that never inspires someone to be like, oh, well, let me tell you all about my life as you just told me I look like hell.
Yeah.
So it's that like finding ways to ask questions that might tap into like really how they're doing or how they're feeling. Like what part of your job do you miss doing the most?
Yeah.
Or what is exciting about what you're working on right now. And if they're like sarcastic, can't answer, struggling to answer like what they find exciting and what they're doing, that's probably a good sign that there's some burnout happening there.
Yeah.
So that's where I loved them, even like bringing it back to the talents. Even if you don't know what their talents are, they could ask questions that give some kind of clues to talent. So like whether they have opportunities to like actually get things done, because maybe they're like an achiever, but they're just spinning their wheels. They're not like feeling like they're getting anything accomplished. Like, do they have opportunities to work with others and actually like solve some things, build relationships? Are they making, do they feel like they're making an impact, influencing others, right? Or like if they actually have time to ponder solutions. So like they see the problems happening, but they're not given the time to like figure out some solutions to what this might happen. Like if you're burnt out, you do not have the energy to think up the solution for the problem, even if that is your strategic thinking, high themes. If you're burnt out, you're probably not there. Like you're just stuck in the drudgery of it. So I loved those examples of ways to ask those questions without like coming right out and being like, yeah, you look really tired today. What's going on with you? Like, I'm not good to talk to you right now. Yeah. We could go on and on because I know that one was a big one and they gave us so much more information. So really reach out to us if you want to learn more about what Gallup has to say about burnout prevention and some tips and cues on using your talents for those. But we'll have to save that for another episode.
Yeah.
Okay, breakout number 2.
Yes. Do you want me to go first?
Go first, yes.
All right. So I attended a session on team coaching. So for those of us like Jen and I that get into rooms and are able to work with teams over a period of time, there was a really interesting exercise. Again, all these sessions had a lot more meat than what we're covering here. But one of the key activities that the two presenters for my breakout session on team coaching was Jackie Merritt and Rose Bloomfield, both from Gallup. They sort of reintroduced a tool that a lot of us use called the team grid. And it's really, for those of you that don't know it, it really just lists the 34 talent themes across the top. And then you list your team members down the side. And then where a team member has a theme, you put in their rank. So, mine would read Chad Ahern, and then there would be a 1 under learner and a 2 under deliberative, a 3 under analytical, and 3 under responsibility, 4 under harmony, and 5 under analytical. But the beauty of that is that once you do that, you can start to identify which themes are most prevalent, which aren't. The expansion that they added was that you can then tweak the language of the themes and pair them together. So maybe a team has high futuristic and high strategy or strategic. Okay. So that is a team that is most likely to tune into future strategy. They might not be as worried about day-to-day operations. So just purely pointing that out and say, hey, this team tunes into future strategy. It just is a starting point to say, hey, is that what our team does? Do we really ignore or not tune into maybe the empathy that we need to be thinking about on a day-to-day basis? So that was one version. And then they actually flipped it and said, then go and look at the themes that are either not present or, if you have a full 34 report, are maybe way at the bottom for a majority of the team. Yeah. So maybe it's learner and empathy. Okay, so are you empathetically learning? Are you not tuning in to learning about other people's emotions? Are you not opening up your radar to that, even though your team might need that? And so it's a conversation starter. And that was the beauty of it, is it wasn't the whole tool, it wasn't the whole conversation. It was, how do you start the conversation about what we look like as a team?
Yeah.
So that was my big takeaway from that.
Oh, that sounds awesome. I can't wait to
Yeah.
listen to that one because we have the opportunity to go back and listen to all these ones that we didn't get to see. And that's one thing about the virtual space I'd say has been really wonderful about this is now
Yeah.
knowing that even whatever choices we made as deliberative, like whatever choices we made of which ones we're going to go to, it's okay if we made a wrong choice, the bad choice, because we can listen to all of them.
Yeah.
Similarly, like in that vein, I went to incorporating a 360 view of performance to enhance leadership coaching. And after I sat there for a minute, I was like, why did I choose this one? Because it didn't really fit for what I felt like it was. It was maybe more towards those coaches who are embedded in a company and ways to take the 360, performance assessment that they do, where you send out the information, the questionnaire to everybody in the company, or whoever works with you, and then you get all of the feedback from above you, from below you, from peers, and really understanding how that stuff like merges in. Well, so I know there's lots and lots of talk about why 360s don't work, how they fail. However, if they're done correctly, with realistic measurements, and Gallup has a whole thing, like a 7 expectations of 360s. So you can ask real tangible things that you can actually measure, as opposed to well, you made me work on this project last week and it sucked, and so now I'm going to give you bad reviews.
Right.
The information that you gather from that 360 can help the employee and the coach understand the content that's part of it. Being able to use that feedback to inform more meaningful action towards adjustments that can be made. Because she talked a lot about, and this was from Heather Barrett, she's from Gallup also, I don't remember what her title is, but I'll Gallup people. But she said one of the things that makes them so ineffective, a 360 so ineffective, is you get all this information, and she used the phrase, it's a desk drop. You literally drop it in their lap, they review it, it makes you
not feel
sad,
great,
upset, now you're trying to figure out who said what about you. It's all these bad things. But if you have that framework set up for it to be actually measurable, it can be something that can be aid a coaching conversation. If you have a coach embedded in your company, or you reach out to a coach, if you got a 360 and you're where the heck were they coming from? If you can add that to the coaching and helping the person understand themselves, see some of their blind spots, and actually work through it and make a plan for how they're going to, because maybe it's just a lack of communication that's happening. I mean, that's most of our problems anyway. So maybe it's just a lack of communication of, some setting some expectations or whatever that might be. But in the blurb that came from your 360 review, you aren't really getting that information. So that was the big takeaway I took from that one, is that even though there are so much, negative about that it can be a positive to help someone actually have actionable things that can come from that, and not just this ad hoc, well, I might not get a raise this year because so-and-so thought I did a bad job.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point about making sure it's actionable. I think that's a fantastic highlight. So what about your third breakout?
I loved my third one. So this was hybrid and remote teams. Let's see, helping hybrid and remote teams engage, connect, and thrive. This was Benjamin Erickson Farr, and this is the one that I quoted, and I want to kind of circle back to this, because in our quick little snip that we did on Wednesday morning, and then we put out to everyone about our first day at the summit, I shared some statistics, and I wanted to clarify that currently, of all remote capable jobs, 3 in 10 are fully remote, 5 in 10 are hybrid, and 2 in 10 are on site, but one of them wishes they could be hybrid. So those, when I gave those statistics before, I think I said all workers. I meant all workers who are currently have a job that could be remote, you remote don't capable. Need to ever, So I wanted to clarify that. So because those are still some pretty crazy numbers. And then what I really took away from this session was there's not a clear, easy way to make the decision about what you're doing, whether you're going to allow people to be remote, hybrid, a mix of remote or on-site or fully on-site, and that really there are pros and cons to all three camps. But what they found true across all three for engagement of employees was that it stems from the need, absolutely need to develop managers and leaders to lead remote and hybrid teams. So there's two big things that came out of that. They need to be able to lead effective meetings. Just because you're in person doesn't mean this meeting is effective. We've all been to meetings where we're like, this could have been an email. Like, what are we doing? So, like you get the mug, this could have been an email. And then the other one was one-on-one, and this is where it comes back to our keynote. One-on-one meaningful conversations with employees every week. And what they do is grown. What you expect me to meet with my people every week, like each person individually every week, like how is that even possible? And Benjamin said, yes, that's the ideal. We want to have meaningful conversations every week. But the idea is when those conversations are happening, whether they're weekly, bi-weekly, every like random 7 to 14 days or something in that realm, it's really important that meeting is meaningful, and how you make that meaningful is caring about their well-being, asking them what's going well. So you're getting the clues to talent. What are they loving to do? How you can help, like what support do they need, and what clarity they need. So that's usually, like the setting expectations or like priority, whatever that may be. And if you're hitting those 4 things and actually getting real answers, not like, hey, how's it going? Fine. And they're like, yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, exactly. If you're actually getting real answers to those 4 questions, you're having a meaningful conversation. You're getting there, you're getting to the root of it. Strengths is an amazing place to help you get that connection quickly and keep it. That was
nice. That was fantastic.
So it was my favorite. It was my favorite.
That's great. My favorite. That's great. We're gonna get to my favorite in the next breakout. The one I attended for breakout number 3 was one on coaching decisions. As coaches, we're always trying to balance. Are we supposed to be advising this person? Are they struggling to come up with options? Do I just need to ask more open-ended questions? And I'll be honest, the session was a little bit of a letdown because I was looking for a little bit more practical, kind of a decision matrix about when do you leave the pregnant pause and maybe when do you lean in and start offering the beginnings of an option or options. So it wasn't quite what I expected, but being the learner I am, I always try and go in, at least find one sort of golden nugget that I can take out and try to think about. And the one for me out of that session was a kind of a coaching framework or essentially some things to think about as you're coaching somebody. And they called it the 3 C's framework. So the 3 C's stand for clarity, capacity, and capability. So the clarity is really, do you as a coach have clarity with your one-on-one client about the clarity of their goals, the clarity of their challenges, and maybe also clarity of where they're trying to get to. Okay. That one was kind of point blank obvious.
Yeah.
The 2 that I thought were really sort of informative were the capacity and the capability parts. The capacity was, does this person or team have the capacity to take action? So if you're talking to a coaching client, and and this goes for managers as well, if you're talking to an employee and say, hey, I'd like you to make some changes, or have you thought about approaching your work a little differently? And the employee then turns around and says, well, my calendar is already booked through the end of August,
right?
From 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. I have no room in my calendar to move anything, and I don't have the authority to cancel any of these meetings. Then you're not providing the capacity for change.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really important. And then the capability part is the person capable of taking action? So it kind of goes hand in hand. So I talked about, do they have the authority to maybe cancel a meeting? Well, if you said, no, you have to be at these meetings, then the person has no capability to make change because they're not in control of their own destiny. And where I thought that point was really important is he actually took it back out away from the individual and to the organization. So as we as coaches, for any of the fellow coaches that listen to our podcast, if you're thinking about engaging with an organization or with a team, one of the first questions you might want to ask them is, are you going to be setting up an environment where people have the capacity and the capability to actually make changes?
Yeah.
So, and I've run into that, coaching session goes really well. They've identified 2 or 3 actions that they really want to take action on. And you check back with them in a week and they're like, well, actually, I couldn't do anything because my week was so full and I didn't have the authority to cancel any of my meetings. And my manager just put 3 more things on my plate. That's not a winning formula for coaching success. So just something to think about.
They're not empowering them to be able to make some of those decisions and changes on the fly in order to make some of those things happen.
Yeah. Or giving, a leader, providing maybe a frontline leader, a frontline individual contributor, the authority to find space in their calendar or to make changes, global changes to how they do their work. It's a really thought-provoking question when you are exploring the opportunity to coach with an organization or a team. Maybe that should be on the checklist of on a sales call or on a proposal review. Like, hey, are you willing to make some changes to what your calendars look like and what actions you're taking, how your team meetings are formatted, or what the agendas look like? If those aren't open, then you're out of luck.
Right.
So,
that sounds like a good one.
Yeah. So I want to move us on to the 4th and 5th breakouts here before we create a day and a half long podcast that we can review the whole summit. Which session did you go to for breakout 4? Because I know we weren't in the same room for that one.
Yeah, the next one was the future of employee engagement. And I think my big takeaway on that one, there was so many stats. I love Benjamin Erickson Farr. He did this one too. I think he came in afterwards. They had somebody else that planned for it originally, but he did a great job. Lots of stats. But one of them was this, the biggest impact on engagement comes from the workers' autonomy, like you were kind of alluding to, giving them the capacity and the capability. But that based on US data, 50% of workers are blenders and the other 50% are splitters. And they define it as this: splitters are those who prefer to work and leave work at work. There's no overlap. And blenders are the ones who prefer to leave that line between work and personal life a little blurry, a little blended.
Okay.
So what the research shows was those both work. You don't have to be one or the other to be an engaged employee. That if you're a splitter and you get to split, you can be engaged and be highly effective. If you're a blender and you get to blend, you can be engaged and highly effective. Where the problem comes in is if you make either one of them, you force them to be the other. So they showed all across the board, when a blender is forced to be a splitter or opposite, there's decreased engagement, there's this decreased evaluation of their overall life, increased burnout, and increased intent to leave the company just because of this. And I was like, oh, that's huge. And so this brought on this whole other thing. They called it the Q12 plus 4. So that was my other little quick takeaway. And those 4 questions, those added 4 questions, are around respect, well-being, performance management, and products and services. So kind of bringing the customer into the decision. So again, so much information I could share forever.
Yeah. So, and I'm sure given that we just mentioned the Q12, we'll drop a link into the show notes about the Q12. It's a way to very quickly assess employee engagement that Gallup has researched over the last, almost 40 years now.
Yeah.
And they've just come out with some new research around these 4. It was alluded to in Jim Harter's keynote about this. They found these 4 additional questions are also kind of tag along indicators of employee engagement because of the growing body of work around respect. And that's the DEI work that a lot of
discussions
that companies are doing. The customer centrality of your actions, that's
and well-being, as they see it's attacking everyone. Yeah.
And then the respect one. The performance management, and that's really tying strengths to goals, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So
Yeah, so thank you
that's
for
great.
clarifying the Q12, because
Yeah.
it's one of those things we use all the time, but maybe not everyone is familiar with that.
Yeah. So we'll drop a link. We'll drop a link in the show notes. Everybody can get educated. It's a great tool.
Right.
Simplifies life a little bit.
So what about your session?
Yeah. So my Breakout 4 was probably my most informative, most full of stats. The one I'm going to have to go over a couple different times listening to. It was presented by Dean Jones, who's always done a fantastic job of presenting Gallup information. And it's a session that I could probably spend a whole podcast on if we went that way.
Yep.
But I think one of the biggest key points he made in that presentation, if nothing else, was the disproportionate impact managers have on success. And then he tied that to where companies often put their development dollars. Usually, and this sort of stereotypical, is, the leaders get all the coaching, all the professional development. They've got to be on top of their game the most. What all the data in his presentation essentially showed was that's wrong. The short version is that's the wrong place to put your development dollars. You're actually better off as an organization or as a team investing in your frontline leaders, as they have the maximum impact on actually getting work done and in driving well-being and employee engagement. So if nothing else, rethink where you're spending your dollars this year.
Yeah.
So that was it. And obviously there's all sorts of data to support that, but that was the nugget.
Yeah, well, that works perfectly into my final one, which was the future of the workplace, and it was a panel discussion. So Gallup has their new report of the workplace that's coming out or just came out. So the state of the workplace, I believe it's called, and we could put that in the show notes as well. But they gave us a few peeks into some of the statistics, and oh my goodness, some of the ugly statistics that were shared. So one of them was about that, exactly what you just said. So 4 out of 10 leaders are actually living and know the values of their organization. Like actually like a whole conversation, like having a whole conversation about like whether you're living it and whether you're trying to create a culture versus forcing a culture. Like this is what we are versus this is, actually what's happening in our company, which I thought was kind of amazing too. And then the other one I thought was really big was that 1 in 5 customers believe that leaders are making decisions that are right for their customer or the patient. And I was like, ooh, that's a horrible number. So these numbers all lead into that, like the middle management really is, and I can share another statistic that I heard from another one about like the leaders tend to be a little more disconnected from what's really going on in their company. The managers seem to have more of a pulse on it. The managers and the employees are the least engaged compared to the leaders. The leaders tend to be more engaged. I think it all stems from what you just were talking about in yours. And then these 2 stats. So what was really amazing, and my favorite part of this one, was in 2020, we had this huge thing happen where the pandemic hit, and it pulled the future forward is the like phrase they used. And we went from 25% of the workforce being hybrid and being able to do this remote working stuff to 65% of the workforce was remote. Caused a massive disruption. But employees were actually more engaged. And they're like, what is happening? What is going on? And it all boils down to communication. During that time, leaders and managers were reaching out more. They were vulnerable to their employees. You can't be like all on it when you got your kids and dogs fighting in the background, like we're all worried about each other's health. Like, are you okay? Like, is your family member sick? There was this, like they said that in times of change, the 4 needs of followers like actually intensify. And that was true of the pandemic. Like that happened across the board. We saw this happening where people were not connected physically, so they had to reach out more. And it did wonderful things. But since we're back to work, there's been a steady decline in this leadership trust due to lack of communication. And when we went back to the office and we went back to working the way we used to, we thought we were going back to like what it was before the pandemic. Right. So there wasn't this like, hey, we're going to get through this, or there wasn't the show, there isn't, or has not been the show of compassion and care that we saw happening during the pandemic. Their big final note, the workplace of 2019 is not coming back.
Yeah.
Like mic drop moment, because we have to do things differently. Like the future is here. It's no longer somewhere we're like carefully stepping to, like it was like thrust on us in that moment, and it's not going back to normal. Normal is not a thing anymore.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that was my big one.
Yeah. The big thing I heard in everything you said is communication is key. You've got to keep talking. That's where the 4 needs. And for those of you that don't know, the 4 needs of followers are building trust, showing compassion, establishing stability, and generating hope. And talk about a heavy load for managers to manage, but that's why communication is so key. And I think that's beautiful that you brought that up.
Well, it was just so interesting to see the difference, between the pandemic, and I've felt it myself, with some of the other contract work that I've done, where I don't feel as connected now, because they do have ability, and I'm a remote worker, but they do have the ability to connect with people physically, and so I do feel like that connection to others has kind of declined. So there is some work still that needs to be done with that communication, definitely.
Yeah. And that it's interesting you brought up the Q12 plus 4 in both your breakouts, your breakout 4 and breakout 5, because the last session I went to as my breakout number 5 was a session on the intersection of engagement and strengths. And I'll be honest, I had hoped for a little bit more information, sort of newer stats, newer thoughts on where engagement and strengths intersect. They covered a lot of information that I already cover and I've done presentations on. They really tied, talking about the Q12, there's statements 3, 6, 11, and 12 that really are key places where strengths come to play in that engagement conversation.
Yeah.
But I think the key thing that I would highlight for our listeners coming out of that conversation and out of that breakout is that oftentimes we get focused on employee engagement as the thing that we should be focusing on. And the presenters, one of them actually happened to be my original trainer, Stephen Shields. He pointed out that engagement is not the what, it is the how. Employee engagement is the how of how you accomplish your organizational mission. So if you've got engaged employees, you're far more likely to end up with that mission, impact, or that stock increase I was talking about, the Gallup curve, it's called. That's all driven in large part by managers making sure that their employees are engaged, and then there's a number of steps in between that and the final output of mission mission achievement. But it is the how, not the what. And I think that's a really clear, it's a very simple word switch, but can do a lot in terms of mindset change and how you're thinking about, well, why are we doing a Q12 or why are we doing a pulse survey? It's not the what. The data is not the what, it's the how. You need to figure out how to engage your employees so that they're supporting your organization. So
it's so interesting, because I had a similar thing in my future of the employee engagement, and when you said that, it just triggered it to me. So I wanted to look at my notes, and they were saying engagement isn't something else on the plate, it is the plate.
Yes.
And I was like, oh, I love that, and it fits really perfectly with it. Yeah, you're right. It is. Oh, so good.
It is the thing.
It is the thing.
And it's more the how. It's more like, it's actually the utensils. It's how you get the food from the plate to your mouth so that the organization is fed and operating well. So
it's like it has to be there, and we need that base, otherwise nothing's going to happen. Yeah. Oh, so good.
Probably mixing some metaphors there, but I hope our listeners got the point. So Jen, now that we've run through all of our keynotes, all of our breakouts, and obviously our listeners, if you want any more detail on any of the stuff we're talking about, please get in touch with us, because it was one heck of a learning experience for both of us.
Yes.
But as we wrap up, I'm wondering if you might have maybe not mic drop moments, but maybe your top 3 final thoughts on the summit, or maybe people that are thinking about going, what should they know? I'm going to start with you, and then I'm going to introduce mine. Then we're going to let our listeners go.
Okay. Yeah, I think my big one was being able to connect in person with some of the people that I got to meet thanks to the pandemic. I met all kinds of people like you virtually, and we've been working together for over a year now. And it's just kind of crazy to think we hadn't ever met in person before. So having that personal connection was awesome. Gallup does a wonderful experience. They put on a wonderful experience. They bring fantastic data, and I love the data. Analytical is my number 13, but it's my first strategic thinking strength. So if I need to get data, like that's where I go. I love that. Just for me, I wanted more. I wanted more content. I wanted more days. I wanted more opportunities, and they gave us lots. Like we had 2 different networking events. Right? 2 different networking events. We had time, in between sessions. I don't know where it went. Like, I just want more. I want more of it, because I felt like when it was time to leave and go to the airport, I'm like, but wait, like I still need another day of this. So whether that's coming from Gallup, or maybe it needs to be something that coaches together are starting to like rally more about, like creating some other opportunities either around or before or after the summit, I think would be really amazing to be part of more of those. One, know they're happening so that I can go. But so that was a really big one. I had one other one and I just lost it.
Okay. Do you want me to run my 2 or 3 and maybe it'll trigger? So I would definitely echo a lot of what you just said. I think something that maybe fellow coaches need to know is that, and you highlighted this at the top of the show, is that the Gallup Summit of 2023 is not the Gallup Summit of 2018, 19, where 17. from what I understand, what I heard from a lot of coaches, that was right around the time I got certified, and they were just launching some of the really sort of strengths-based summits. There was a lot more material that was really kind of aimed at us independent coaches. So I think an independent coach listening to this, you just need to be aware of that some of the language and some of the breakouts and some of the keynotes is definitely Gallup trying to speak to their current or potential business to business clients. Customers. There's still takeaways. There's still learning. I would echo also your thought that it went way too fast, that I could have used another day or a day and a half at least. And so I would also just in that vein share that if you are heavy on your relationship building themes, if you operate a lot in that domain, just be aware that you are going to kind of be introduced to a lot of people and then immediately have to leave them. And so just something to think about.
Maybe on the heels of our woo, that's an okay thing for those who have woo. My relator that's at 8 was not necessarily that happy about having to leave everyone so quickly. And you did spark my last moment. So one of the last things that we had the opportunity to get, and it depended on if you were able to like stay a little longer, but they provided 2 extra sessions for certified coaches, which I thought were amazing. One of them, and I didn't go to both, I only went to one, but one of them was specifically for teachers using Clifton Strengths with students. And the other one was Clifton Strengths and using like the coach, like being a coach and having your own business. And I thought that was amazing that they did that for us coaches. I think that was a really big benefit. And I'm just pleading with Gallup that if they do these in the future, to do more of that. Maybe it's another day of like other things that coaches specifically can go to and have, some of those interactions with other coaches, because there's always that time, like you said, that you wish there would have been more of that time during the session to be able to talk and like work through like an idea or whatever. There wasn't a lot of that in this. I had a couple of sessions that were, but it would be great if we could do some of that as like an add-on.
And I'll also, and this is going to sound a little bit deliberative, toned, but just be aware that if you're planning to go to Omaha and like this is the first time in Omaha and you want to check out a brand new city, I had almost 0 time for that. So they keep you very busy, jumping from one session to the next. They have wonderful evening networking events that, get out 7:30, 8 o'clock. And usually by then, at least for me, I was pretty well, toasted and done and wanted to go back to the hotel room.
And we're finding having dinner out. Next thing you know, you're like, crap, it's time to go to bed. So it does go so fast.
So just doing that. And then I would also echo your point of probably what I'll do differently next time is try and find more of those opportunities to do some of the pre or post coach specific things. I know our wonderful fellow coach, Charlotte Blair, put together something. Our Eat to Grow community was trying to get fellow coaches together to have some conversations.
And then Richard Sterry with who was the creator of Cascade. He also had that. So.
Yeah, he did something. I also think he joined in with Charlotte to support her event too. So I know that there's activities out there, but I think if you're an independent coach like Jen and I are, and you're listening to this, wondering, do I go? I would give some consideration to building in some time to do some coach specific work.
Some extra days.
Yeah. So with that, that's our summary of the 2023 Gallup at Work Summit. I know we kind of meandered all over the place and we weren't able to go super deep on everything. So as we've said at the beginning, we'll say it again. If you have any questions about anything that we've talked about, any of the ideas have sparked ideas for your team or your organization, please reach out to Jen or I. We're both coaches ready and willing to help people get better, be more engaged, and improve their well-being. So our contact information is in the show notes. Jen, any last things you want to say to our listeners before we sign off?
I think just like you said, we have so much more we could share with you. So if any of this sparked anything in you and you want to continue the conversation, we are open. Yeah, reach out.
Yeah. Contact information is in the show notes. And with that, though, we're going to say goodbye. I'm Chad Ahern from Talent Teams Consulting, encouraging you to keep playing to your strengths.
And I'm Jen Werner from Jen Werner Coaching. Why can't I say that today? And I'm encouraging you to be uniquely you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.